be AC/DC, right? It's all about repetition, finding the right intensity and laying down structures. Part of good writing is learning to write fast.
A routine as well as like, it's not a prison that you have to live by.
You better know the rules before you start to break the rules. But if you want to be good, you do have to start to at least bend the rules at certain points. Practice faster sooner than you think that you should be practicing faster.
Hey, what's up, guys? Thank you for joining me and welcome to the show. It is a true blessing to be able to connect with the top minds in strength each and every week and share stories, insights, and experiences on becoming stronger in every area of our lives. And now I want to do more for you. I want to invite you to join the exclusive private Facebook group of The Strength Connection. In this group, I share the biggest takeaways and lessons from these amazing conversations, as well as training and strength tips for pursuing mastery and fulfillment in life. This group is filled with individuals looking to take full control over their strength in their lives, and it's the perfect space to explore ideas and share your journey. You'll also get exclusive access to the Strength Connection Mastery Seminars. It's a deep dive into physical, mental, and spiritual training that you can begin using immediately. Just go to the Facebook groups, type in the Strength Connection, and you'll be accepted immediately. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll catch you on the inside. What's up, guys? Welcome back to the show. Pat, always a pleasure to have you on. Welcome back. Thank you so much for taking the time, man.
Always a joy to be here, Mike. Thanks for having me on again.
Yeah, we were just riffing on just the music scenes of, I was telling you about my old time in Boston, and we kind of just started getting into the lessons of being good at a bunch of things versus just being good at one thing right off the bat. I was like, oh, this is just gold stuff. We better start recording this before we get too far down the rabbit hole.
Yeah, so I want to just emphasize, if people have not heard the band Extreme, which all of you have heard the band Extreme because they're from Boston, and you've all heard the band Extreme because they sing the song More Than Words. Everybody knows that song, right?
Oh yeah, okay. Yep.
Right. But that's the song you ignore. You want to listen to all their other stuff, all their other funk metal stuff. Like, so it's funny, sorry to get off on a tangent right away, but that album sold incredibly, incredibly well because of that hit single. But I once heard that it was one of the most returned albums of all time, because I guess like a bunch of, I don't know, women went out and bought it because of that song. And then the whole rest of the song is just funk metal. So it's totally unlike that song. So they're like, what the heck is this thing, right? I thought this was like a Backstreet Boys type of band, and it's definitely not that. But it's all the other stuff that I love. More Than Words is great too, but you got to listen to the rest of that entire album to really love and appreciate Extreme.
Oh, that's so interesting. My sister's the music nut in our family. She owns her own DJ company. She's been like that forever. And I'm like that person that, like, I've never heard of that band before, but I've known that song. So I know like the songs. It's just always hard to piece everything together, from there. I remember that was actually, you remember the old band Yellowcard?
Yeah.
They have some underground stuff that is actually like very hard, like very harsh stuff before they got into all the violins and all that stuff that made them like the Ocean Avenue and stuff. It's like my buddy who was huge of finding like bands before they became big and seeing if their sound was the same, because he had this like thought of like, oh, if they changed just for, to get mainstream, like I don't like them anymore. Right. And Yellowcard was one of those bands. I remember I was like, wow, like their stuff was nasty. It had a deeper alt rock feeling to it, like that old school kind of punk feeling to it. Yeah,
there's something about that too, of like, why is it so often that the first album is like the best album? So go to Van Halen 1, which is one of my favorite albums of all time. And I would argue it might be their very best album. And I think there's a good explanation for that. Is most of the bands for their first album have had so much time to make that album, because this is what they were working on for so long before they were signed. Right. So like Van Halen, they were signed pretty young and they were young, but like those songs were worked on for a really long time with tons of energy and enthusiasm, and they were hungry and they put it out and it was a killer album. But then they like kind of rushed Van Halen too. Still a great album. But then like the management like puts the pressure on, makes you crank. So there's just kind of, I think just not enough time and hungriness. I think that helps to explain why some of the earlier stuff is some of the absolute best stuff.
Well, it's interesting. If you go back to that time, I mean, now we were talking about there's so much talent out there, and and now you can see all that talent because you can just have free bandwidth and you could throw it up on YouTube and somebody could find it. There's 8-year-olds out there, as you said, who are some of the best guitarists and drummers that you can find. Right. But it's almost like back then, probably you spent all that time on that first album. That was really your soul. Like that's why you loved what you were doing. Then it's probably just happens where now you get a little bit of fame, you get a little bit of people that are chirping in your ear of, oh, well, now this is what you need to do.
Yeah.
Get it out really quick. It's almost kind of half baked when you put it out, like you haven't thought it all the way through. But I think it's probably a good lesson for almost anything, right? It's like people in strength training, like you do, like when you first get into it and you do the good stuff, that's the things that really give you the most strength. Then all of a sudden you think you need to do something else afterwards. It's like, no, just keep doing the same good stuff and you're probably going to keep progressing.
Right. Be AC/DC. Right. That's why they just kept doing it. They never changed at all. Right. So just be AC/DC and you'll be fine. Right. That's exactly right.
That's so fun. Like the AC/DC of strength training. What are the 4 exercises, like the 4 chords? And
let's do an E, a D, an A, and a G, and you're good to go. Right. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Oh, it's just, it's great lessons right off the bat. Well, every time, Pat, I have you on, I always like to say, I was a huge fan of yours before we first connected.
Thank you.
You're one of the first guys who was really not even going to use the word blogger, but you were blogging more, for a while, and got me really interested in writing and, reading about fitness and strength articles. You came from kind of the RKC world. So, I saw that as the pattern. So you were a huge inspiration to me for a lot of the stuff that I'm doing. So if anybody's a fan of me, they're probably a fan of you, even if they haven't digested your stuff. But the work
that's very, very flattering. Thank you, Mike. Yeah.
Well, I love the podcast that you do. I mean, you have you and Dan riff all the time. Dan, John, the weekly stuff. I love just going on walks and listening to you guys. You have Alex on, who's an awesome guy as well, of getting in. But you're one of those guys that you are tapped into a bunch of different things. You're in the strength world. You have your podcast. You're writing a couple of books. I know right now you just had baby number 5. Congratulations on that, which is awesome. So managing all this, I can't imagine, of just kind of organizing your time and your structure on it. But, I really appreciate you taking the time and just jamming with me so we can get into some of these fun topics.
I couldn't miss it, my friend. I love this. I love this stuff. And I always love chatting with you, really.
Yeah. So one of the things I did want to ask you about, because I think we talked about this after we recorded before, is you're a consistent writer every day. Work you write to your community. I know you're writing a couple of books right now.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you a little bit about your process of writing, anything that you do on a daily basis. I know if you don't have a routine for it, it can be very easily, go down, a bad path for the day. Do you have a specific process that you use for writing either your articles or even getting into your books? Is it similar? Is it a little bit different now that it's more of a book that you're doing? Or?
Yeah, well, I'll try and tie it all together with strength training because I think there's a lot of similarities. And you're right, I'm tied into a lot of different things. My two sort of primordial loves were always music and philosophy. My academic backgrounds are in philosophy. And then when I was going to college, I was personal training and teaching kettlebells and all those ways to pay the bills. So there's somewhat of a connection between all this stuff. And the way I think about it, Mike, is I think about it's the importance of laying down structures, and to lay down structures always takes time and tons of repetition, right? So we think about with music, if you want to get good at the guitar, if you want to play Eddie Van Halen's Eruption, which is a little bit tricky in parts, you have to lay down the structures. You have to lay down the structures of the finger patterns, the literal muscular structures in your hand, the neurological structures, right? Your brain has to develop in certain ways. And that just takes a lot of repetition. And at first it's going to feel awful. It's going to feel awkward. It's going to feel weak. But if you just take your time and keep trying to just repeat the patterns over and over and over in a way that you're kind of balancing on that edge of being challenged, but still mostly successful in failing, those structures will build. And this should sound familiar to anybody who's familiar with strength training, right? Because that's just all we do in strength training is we just build structures through many, many repetitions. And we try to challenge ourselves using progressive resistance. And we kind of like skirt up to right where our abilities are, but we don't push beyond them too much. We don't want to go to failure too much because then we start to kind of lay down bad habits or bad structures. And over time, these structures build up and we get stronger. We become more competent. I think this is exactly the same generally for pretty much any skill. It's all about repetition, finding the right intensity in laying down structures. The same is true for writing, right? You have to lay down writing structures. And the only way to do it is by getting, like for exercise, it's getting in a certain number of reps per day. For music, it's getting in a certain number of notes per day. And for writing, it's getting in a certain number of words per day. And there's just no way around it. You just have to do it, right? There's just nothing else. Like, you can study all the theory in the world that you want, music theory, physiology,
right?
Right. You can read all the writing books you want. There's lots of good ones out there, and all that stuff is good. I think that helps you to focus your practice. But at the end of the day, you just have to practice, right? The best guitar players, which we've talked about, are the ones that if you ask them what they do, they say, I play guitar 6 hours a day, right? Sometimes more than that.
Right.
If you ask the best writers in the world, what do you do? I write. I shut the door at 8 a.m. and I come out at 4 p.m. And that's what I do every single day. Right. Even Stephen King's got a nice book called On Writing. He's not my favorite writer, but nobody can doubt his success and his ability.
Yeah.
And that's what he does. His advice is you have to shut the door. And if you want to be a writer, you have to read a lot and you have to write a lot. You have to have a habit. You have to have a ritual. So that's what I have. I target anywhere between I think having ranges are important for any skill. Here's the kind of floor, no matter what, I'm just not going below this floor.
Gotcha. Like a non-negotiable.
A non-negotiable. Like in fitness, hey, maybe it's just like a push-up and swing ladder or a daily walk. Just no matter what, I'm hitting that floor, right?
Yep.
And then you have a ceiling, like something like, I probably shouldn't go beyond this because I might get hurt, or it's just really not productive after this point, and my focus is lost. And I want to be somewhere in that range, right? And maybe more often closer to the ceiling than the floor, but having a range. So for me, I've got at least 3,000 words per day. I find that if I start to go over 10,000 words per day, I start to get a little tired and lose focus and stuff like that. So that's my range. And I try to get that done early. I think everyone's got to kind of like figure out their feel for everything. I feel that I'm most creative in the morning hours, between like 8 a.m. and noon. Yep. And that works out really well because I like to have an afternoon workout. So I just shut the door, usually around 8 a.m. I've got my Ninja Turtles mug and my coffee, and I just write. And I have a writing warm up, which is usually my email for my social media.
Okay.
And then maybe like a quick blog post. You should always have warm ups, right? Warm ups are important for everything. I have warm ups for guitar, warm ups for exercise. It helps get you into flow, helps get you concentrated. And warm ups, here's something a little controversial. I think warm ups should be fast. I think people want to go a little too slow at first. That doesn't mean they should be heavy, but they should be fast. And part of good writing is learning to write fast. A lot of people get stuck on writing because they try to edit as they write, and then they'll stay on the same sentence or paragraph for 14 years, right?
Right.
That isn't how you build flow. You have to just write quick, write fast, get it out. And a good warm-up should do that. It should be something you should just be able to just get into the flow of getting words down quickly, and then you come back and edit later, right? That to me is a good writing warm-up. Same thing on guitar. You're light and you just try to quickly get that speed up and the fingers warmed and all that. I guess exercise is a little different. You might want to do a few things slow, but I usually am pretty quick in my warm-ups. I jog and jump rope and stuff like that. So even there, I'm pretty quick. Yeah. And then once the warm-up is done, which also serves a business function, because those are related to business, then I go to my primary writing assignment for the day, whatever that is. So I do try to get to swallowing the biggest frog first, which also ties into fitness, right? I usually like to put the most demanding exercise early on,
absolutely,
right? When I'm freshest. So same thing with writing, whatever is going to be the most demanding, intense thing. I want to get to that as quickly as I can after the warm up. Like I said, I've got 2 books I'm working on right now, but I also I'm always usually writing articles of other sorts for other websites or academic articles or something like that. But whatever the primary thing is, I spend the bulk of my time on that. Sometimes I'll get it done, or sometimes I'll get done like what I want to get done, whether it's a chapter or so many words. And then I'll move on to a secondary assignment. And that's usually what I'll do most days. And then that'll usually kind of hit me up against my time limit. And then I'll go work out and then shift my focus entirely after that.
That's great. There's a few threads I want to pull on that. The book you mentioned by Stephen King on writing, it's a phenomenal book. Anybody that's interested in this modality of getting into writing, I love that it was like half autobiography that he wrote and half kind of like, these are some things you can really do to improve your writing. And I'm the same, like I'm not the biggest Stephen King fan, but I love how he writes characters because they're very, it's like, that person, like everybody knows that person. He's very good at that, type stuff. But I remember like he was talking about, like he was blasting AC/DC in the background when he's writing. And I'm like, if I had AC/DC playing in the background, there is no way I'm writing anything down. Like that's just not for me, kind of finding your own zone there. But as you mentioned there, like the warm up on that, which I thought was interesting with writing, when you do that, is it a kind of like just getting words out like quickly? Is it like a mind dump? Do you have a theme that you go into like for your warm up? Like, how does that process work?
Yeah. So one other thing that I should mention is I think you should do a little bit of reading before writing as well. And this is a tip I got from another writing book of a similar title of Stephen King's. I actually think it's better than Stephen King's book. It's called On Writing Well. So Stephen King's book is On Writing. This one's called On Writing Well by William Zinsser, who was a journalist for many years. And I actually love him as a writer. He's got a beautiful prose style, not as successful as Stephen King though. So keep that in mind, but still a tremendous writer. And he always gave the advice of however you want to write that day, read something that you want to emulate, right? So if you want to write humor, then you start your day by reading Mark Twain or Ringard, right? If you want to write philosophy, well, then you better pick up, here's a book I was just reading the other day, Mortimer Adler's 6 Great Ideas, right? Great philosopher and great writer. So the idea is you want to get both, you want to have your mind saturated in whatever the genre is that you're going to be writing that day. But also, Zinsser would say, find a writer with a really great style and prose, so you have their sort of rhythm in your ear too before you write.
Right.
So that's what I'll do for anything that I'm writing that day. Okay, I want to find something that's in the genre of what I'm writing to help focus my mind, and also something that's going to give me a little bit of a cadence or a flow. And I've got so many different writers that inspire me in that way, from Zinsser himself to E.B. White, and Adler's also a phenomenal writer as well. So those are the two things that I focus on. And again, that's very similar to music. Like if I'm going to practice rock guitar, I'm not going to be listening to classical music beforehand.
Right.
I'll listen to classical music in general because those generalist connections are important. Right. But I'm going to listen to Van Halen if I want to like record a Van Halen, Van Halen-ish thing, right? I want Van Halen in my ear before I do that. So that would be my other piece of advice that goes into the warm up, and it can be short, just like 10 to 15, maybe 20 minutes of just reading something that is relevant to the type of project you want to do that day to inspire you and get you going.
It's funny. It's a conversation I had recently with Fabio Zonin comes to my mind when we were talking about the difference between a warm up and a ramp up, because he was talking about like ramping up for like a 1 rep max if you're doing something, and kind of what you were talking about kind of seems a little bit more of like not just a warm up, but you're ramping up. You're kind of getting specific into movement that you're doing. If you're going to go for a bench press max, like, you need to do a little bit more probably for opening up your pecs, maybe, activating your lats of getting in, where if you're doing other stuff, maybe you don't need to do that on the day. So it's kind of a ramp up has a little bit of a specificity to it.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
That's exactly right.
Well, it's interesting when you talked about, like with writing, like I started reading The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron, which is a very interesting book for writing. It's about like getting 3 pages of mind dump out every day of getting it, just kind of getting into the process of putting pen to paper. Yeah. But when I started reading, I started getting into more of like poetry and writing in more of like a poetic type form, just more for like a creative writing process. I was reading both Walt Whitman and Charles Bukowski, who have 2 very different styles of there. But it is, you can see the difference of what's on your mind of getting into different type of people that you're working with. So I think that's a really good point of, if you're writing a specific type of piece, read something about that first of getting it. It's kind of that difference, as I said, between the warm up and the ramp up.
And not only that, but another important part of this, because everyone's always worried about writer's block. And I almost never have writer's block. And that's because I almost never write about something that I'm not intensely passionate about or have researched immensely. Right. If you asked me to write about how to build a chicken coop, I would have nothing to say. But absolutely nothing to say, right? Or any other topics. I would have a writer's block as bad as anybody. So the other part of Stephen King's advice that I think is so right is half of his advice, you have to write a lot. The other half of his advice is you have to read a lot. And that's right. You have to have the raw materials to work with. If you know nothing about the subject that you're supposed to write about, and I would say if you're not super passionate about it, that of course you're going to have a writer's block. Again, I'll go back to music, right? You can't really improvise well if you haven't spent all the time building your fundamentals, learning your scales, your modes, your phrases. You need that raw material sort of in the bank, so that way you can draw from it hopefully in a very spontaneous and gracious way when you go to actually create and improvise. But it can't come from nothing, right? It has to be in the bank. So the thing that's in the background of all of this is you better be reading a ton. You better try to learn as much as you can about the subject you're interested in. You have to be interested in it. I don't write about anything I'm not interested in. I couldn't do it. I've never been able to do it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I wonder, like, do you think that's maybe writer's block then, as people who, I mean, maybe it's not like not knowing what to write about, but it's more like thinking that that first draft has to be perfect. Like you said, like they're editing beforehand. Do you think that's where a lot of like blockage comes into play?
It's two things for writer's block. One is not knowing the subject or being interested in it. That's one issue. Not enough interest, not enough knowledge. And the other one is perfectionism, right? Mm-hmm. Saying, man, I'm not happy with this lead, and rewriting the same sentence over and over and over. Another great piece of writing advice is, again, just go fast, really fast, get it out. Don't worry. Just be okay that it's going to be a mess at first. That's fine. And then if you want to find a good lead, just delete your first two paragraphs. Almost always your third paragraph will be a fine lead. Mm-hmm.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, because you'll kind of be in the flow at that point, and it'll be more natural. Whereas your first effort's always a little contrived, always a little artificial. But then if you just keep going and you're not thinking about it, by the time you get to your third or fourth paragraph, it'll be a lot more natural. And I forget what book I got that from, but it was such a good piece of advice. And I went through so much of my writing and like, in almost all of these, if I just took off the first two paragraphs, the third one is a great intro. Mm-hmm.
That's really funny. You know, you can tie that right into like strength training work. It's like the first time you do any movement in like a warm up, you're going at a very, you're freezing cold. It's like, I've thought of that the other day. I was doing just an arm bar, just warming up. I'm like, wow, I do not feel good at all.
Right. It looks awful, feels awful. This is one of those days. Especially when you get older like us, right?
Oh, absolutely. Like all of a sudden it's like, wow, it's like, really, should I train today? I don't know. Yeah. And then no joke, as soon as you got into like, probably like that third to fourth type exercise, okay, now the body's getting a little bit warm here. It just goes right into the direction of any skill building going on in there at all. So you mentioned so you go like 3,000 words is kind of that's the bare minimum. That's the non-negotiable. Mm-hmm. Then you said like, if you're getting over 10,000 words or so, that's almost kind of like the equivalent of going to failure from there. Like, what does that feel like in there? Do you feel like it's just not clear anymore, or is just...
Yeah, it's different feelings. Sometimes, I mean, I get into fits sometimes, and sometimes I'll write close to a book in a single day. But then I get really nervous of what I'm going to be looking at tomorrow, right? And so I try to set certain limiters like that. If I get to that 10,000 word, I guess, limit in a day, that's a good day for me. And like anything else, like strength training, like music, there's just natural ebbs and flows, right? Some days, you just feel awesome, right? And you can't explain it. You just like, wow, the weights feel super light. I can't miss a rep. I just feel amped. I just feel pumped. Same thing with music. Some days it's like, man, I can't miss a note. Like, I wish I was on stage right now because I never played so well. And same thing with writing. Sometimes it's like, man, I can't stop writing, right? But then there's other days where it's like, man, I can't form a single sentence. I can't hit a single rep. I can't hit a single chord. I feel like an absolute idiot. Right. And then you've got a lot in between, right? And I don't have any advice for that, except for to say this is something that everybody has to deal with. So what you do is you just acknowledge it and you just work with it, right? And you just keep working on the days that you don't sound great, that you don't write great. You just do it anyways, and you just accept that, okay, this is just one of those days. No big deal. We have those days. I know I'll have a great day later on, and I'll have a lot in between. So yeah, I don't know. I guess I'm not answering your question well, but I guess I'm sort of so in the habit right now that my mind and body are so trained that I always sort of just naturally stop somewhere in that range anyways. Right. That I don't really ever feel like I've gone too far in writing. I did recently with one of the books I'm writing. I think I got down like 45,000 words in one day. And then over the next couple of weeks, I tried to reshape and reorganize and essentially just rewrote the whole thing. I'm like, okay, I need to not do that again, because it was not as productive as it would have been if I would have just like stopped myself sooner and got more organized and stuff like, if that makes sense. It does. Yeah. It's an interesting,
idea that you mentioned.
And I don't do drugs. When people hear that, like, do so, like with Stephen King, like apparently he wrote Cujo in one day, but he did a ton of drugs, right?
Well, yeah, if you're
doing
if you're bumping rails all day, it's like, I think you can probably, well, I think he also doesn't remember writing. I think it's Cujo or Carrie,
he like completely disassociated or something, and like woke up and had this novel written or whatever.
Oh yeah,
I recommend that. Yeah.
I mean, fascinating guy how he did it. You know, and I recommend that book to anybody who's interested in this modality, but really just kind of skill development. I think you can get a lot, you know, just from his style of writing. But what you mentioned there about, I mean, everybody I think can understand the days when you're feeling like a 10 out of 10 or a 1 out of 10, right? It's you don't need to have like a degree. You don't really need to have a lot of experience or reference point to understand those days.
Right.
But as you mentioned, like a lot of those days, it's in between. It's kind of like that, like the RPE scale, the rate of perceived exertion. We say, it's like, okay, it's a lot easier for somebody, whether you've been an experienced person in a field or not, to know what a 10 out of 10 and a 1 out of 10 feels like. But the difference between those 5 out of 10 days and those 6 out of 10 days, it's like, and you know, like if you're like lifting a belt, like if you're doing like a kettlebell military press, knowing the difference between a 5 out of 7, that takes more skill. That takes like the reference point, you know, those days when it's like 10 out of 10, like everything feels just perfect. And then there's other days when just the body feels like absolute shit. But knowing that difference between like those middle days, like those shades of gray, that seems like it's where the repetitions really start to play a lot more of kind of knowing into writing and skill.
Yeah, you get a lot more intuitive about that. And the other thing I want to emphasize is nothing is ever wasted. Even on those 1 out of 10 days, those reps still count. You're still going to get better overall and long term. So what I'm saying is, like, even on those 1 out of 10 days, don't not practice on those days. Maybe you have to adjust your practice and adjust your expectations, but definitely keep the practice going. The last thing you want to do is get in the habit of like only writing or only playing music or only lifting when you feel like an 8 or above. That's a big mistake, because those days are going to be few and far between. You just have to make a habit of doing it all the time, being realistic about the sort of the natural ebb and flow of our energy and concentration and feelings and all of that. And then, just also learning to kind of be more in tune with yourself and realize, I'm probably at a 5 or 6 today. And that takes time, right? You just need hours and hours of just being at some sort of craft to really be able to make those sort of judgments accurately. Right.
Yeah. Well, I think it's such an interesting thing. I've been down this rabbit hole of like structure versus intuition for a while now. You know, I've talked with a lot of people about it, and some are like, you need to follow a plan, you need to have a strict routine. And I'm like, okay, I understand that. And then other people are, you need to build more intuition. You need to be more flexible in this. It's like, well, I can also understand that too. But I was like, I think, you know, where you're at in your life and your career and the skills that you developed, I think you got so many reps under your belt that being more intuitive is probably really good for you. Where if somebody's just getting started in writing or lifting or maybe starting a musical instrument, get that routine down, have that rigid structure first, and just get the reps, and don't worry about like this scale, I guess, of what we're talking about. If you're just getting started, don't even worry about 1 out of 10 versus 10 out of 10. Just get the reps in and just keep working there.
I'll bring the music analogies in again, because here I think it's really relevant. I had a music theory teacher in high school who was great, Mrs. Krakow. God bless her, wonderful woman, hard teacher, but good. And she would always say, has always stuck with me. I think it's true. You better know the rules before you start to break the rules. But if you want to be good, you do have to start to at least bend the rules at certain points, right? And this is kind of gets to the intuitive thing and the structure thing. Yeah, at least for me and pretty much all my disciplines, the structure, the rigidity, that came first, right? You've got your plan, it's laid out. You've got to learn your scales and your intervals and your chords and your modes. You got to put the metronome on and practice your subdivisions, and it's all kind of tedious and boring. But I don't think you should wait like 15 years before you really begin to try and express your creativity and begin improvising. I think, to me, it's really a both and even when I was very young, I always tried to be very spontaneous and creative on the guitar and kind of doing things that weren't by the book, for example. But at the same time, I was learning what the book was teaching me, and I had my instructors and stuff like that. I think Van Halen's another good example of this. I'm obviously a big Van Halen fan. My understanding is that he was formally trained. His dad was a musician. I think his mom was pretty hard on the boys about their piano lessons, would like slap their hands with a ruler and stuff like that, like which is how it should be, I think. Wish parents will tougher
bring
these
that
days
back,
on that stuff, right? Yeah. I'm sure he looked back and, Eddie passed away 2 years ago. We all miss him greatly, but I'm sure he probably looked back, was very thankful for that. But Eddie is a guy who's really known to break the rules. But I think we can also definitely say he understood those rules, right? He understood the rules, and he kind of learned how to dance around them. And he was super, super spontaneous, right? If you watch Eddie play any of his stuff, any of his solos, he almost never plays it the same way twice, like including like Eruption, right? Famous Eruption. And my understanding is they had like a number of takes of that, and they were all different. They just released it was just him kind of playing around, right?
Right.
And so you have like everybody on YouTube studying exactly what Eruption was, but like
like
Eddie
which version?
Eddie didn't even know what it was, right?
What date? Yeah, exactly.
He was just ripping, bending the rules. I'm pretty sure there's a couple mistakes in there, but it kind of sounded cool, and he just went with it. So it's kind of funny, like, if you think about how Eddie probably thought about it, it's probably quite different than how everybody who analyzes Eddie thinks about it. But he's a good example of somebody who people look to him as somebody who's extremely creative, because he was somebody who was like an atom bomb in terms of music. I mean, when Van Halen 1 came out, like I wasn't alive then, but I can only imagine like how that just immediately set the new standard of what it meant to be a guitar player, right? But he was somebody who definitely had the structure growing up, knew the rules, but was obviously willing to bend and break the rules and be very intuitive in his playing. Yeah. So it's a strong both and for me. You need the structures, because if you don't have the structures and you don't know the rules, you're gonna perform like garbage, right? You're not gonna have the foundations to really be creative in a coherent way, whether that's with exercise or movement or music or writing. If you don't have those foundations, you're not going to turn out something that's beautifully creative. You're going to be a hack, right? That's the difference, right? A hack is somebody who just tries to be creative and intuitive without having those foundational disciplines, right? That's what a hack is. Somebody who's really creative is somebody who spent the time, put in the hours of hard work, built the foundation, and learned to kind of like play within it, and occasionally step outside of the rules, right? But not all the time.
Yeah. That's a really interesting point that you mentioned with Van Halen, because it's like nobody talks about the piano lessons that he had with getting the ruler hit on it, because that's not a sexy story. Like you hear all of the creative stuff afterwards, but not realizing that the foundation was built before that beautiful house came on top of it. I remember hearing a story of Robin Williams with comedy, where before he taped one of his big specials, I think it was the one he did in New York City, he was writing jokes in the back, like in his green room, like that he was going to try on stage, where it's like, where everybody talks about the different processes like he has. It's like, he just loved comedy so much. He had such a passion behind it that he kind of knew when he got out, if he had a joke that he was going to try out and bombed, he knew exactly how to get back to it, so he had kind of those lifelines that he could take.
He knew how to bail, as all good performers do.
Exactly.
You have to know how to bail if something's not working. With your music or exactly.
Oh, absolutely. Like he had his like 3 or 4 just gold standards that he knew would bring everybody back, into it. But he's like, he was at a level where, it's a kind of a parallel quote of my good friend Brian Grasso always quoted as, know the rules like a pro so you can break them like an artist.
I like that.
And it's like, well, and I think a lot of people, like the artist stuff is very sexy. Like that's where we want to get to. But spending that time as the professional of learning that process first of, whether it's music, just doing the scales, or if you step into the weight room, just doing the same movements over and over again and progressively overloading them. Like if you start and you just do like a reaching hinge, if you've never, done that before, and then you work up to a light weight and then into a heavier weight, and then all of a sudden you're deadlifting regularly, you're going to build a lot of strength. All the things that you're aiming for, of what you're desiring in your mind, are probably going to come. You don't need a lot of creativity then. Right. But once you get to that level, once you get to a certain spot, then adding the intuition afterwards. So I think it's that both and that you're talking about. But like take some time, I think, to play around, just be creative with it, like play around, just go off the beaten path. Probably music is probably known most for this, because people are like, like Eddie, who's just like, just start riffing, just start, changing it up, but build that foundation first. It's always good to go back to it.
Yeah. And And so just in terms of, I hope people are making all the connections to exercise. So it's practical, because I understand everybody listening might not be a musician or even a Van Halen fan. And I will always look down on you if that's the case. You have to be a Van Halen fan. I can go back and forth on whether you prefer Hagar or Roth. I actually like them both, but you gotta love Eddie. But this is why whenever I'm following a program, and insofar as I can with my clients, I always like to have like a variety day, early on, where people can express themselves using the tools and the moves that they have. And I also think it's quite important to have, something outside of the weight room that the weight room is sort of driving toward, whatever that is, something else physical and expressive, whether it's a martial art, that's my background. So I naturally gravitate towards that, or Frisbee or something else, right? Something else where you can be more spontaneous and kind of allow the what you've been building in the weight room to express itself in a different context, aside from just, pushing the weight overhead or something like that.
Yeah. That early on variety day is something that I've adopted. I wish I did it a long time ago. Cause I was of that thought process for a while as a coach, and even of myself, of like, get the foundations down. Like even with like kettlebell training, and we came from similar backgrounds in kettlebell training, I would have people do swings and get-ups for a long time. Like, no, you need this foundation. You need to build it down. Oh, we're going to get to the snatch. Yeah, we'll get to that eventually, but get this down first. And now it's like, well, you know what? It's like people aren't bubble wrapped. Like they can learn how to snatch very quickly. Like, yeah, it might be a different technical movement of there. Like maybe it takes a little bit more brain power, but no, get them into that as quick as possible. If you want to learn that, I think that's absolutely fine. And I think that's where a lot of young coaches, like, we can get so serious about the foundations of getting that down. And yes, that's important, but still have that variety day in there. Tim Almond calls it the scratch the itch day. It's like, just go out and just scratch the other itches. That you have of playing. And I love it because I've lived in an area where we have a couple pickleball courts over here of like 8 courts, and people are there all day. And it's like from every different age. There's like young kids all the way up to people who are probably in their 70s and 80s. I'm like, that is so beautiful. Just getting out and just doing a different type of activity than just going in the weight room.
And not only that, but I think sometimes people can overestimate how much carryover there is between certain things. And structures are always sort of highly specific, right? So generally, you want to be as specific as you can about the thing you want to be good at. So I'm like you, Mike. I actually push, if somebody really wants to do snatches, then we got to get the kind of basic hinging pattern down, but I'm all about getting to the snatches as quickly as possible. Right. And because they're different structures. And I'll go back to music because this is one of the things I know the best. There's often this piece of advice on music that if you want to play fast, really fast on guitar, then you should play really, really slow. And that's true, but not exactly the best advice, right? So, and it's because the structures are different. When you're playing very slow on the guitar, there's time, I'm going to mess up the physiology of it, but it's something like this, right? There's enough time where your brain can send a signal and get feedback from your finger between each note. But when you're playing really, really fast, that's not the case anymore. What happens then is your brain has to send a chunk of information at a time before it can get feedback. So it starts chunking information. And that's a totally different structure than playing slow. And the only way you can get good at the sort of chunk processing is by just pushing the speed as quickly as you can. So like you get the notes down slow, but then like you don't gradually work your way up. You get the notes down slow and then you push the speed as much as you can, as quickly as you can. And there's actually studies on athletics that verify this, that athletes that focus more soon on velocity rather than accuracy end up having better velocity and accuracy than those that just focus on accuracy.
Really? Okay.
Velocity, right? And that's exactly what I discovered in music. You got to get some accuracy first. You can't just go for velocity. But once you've got your kind of decent enough accuracy, you push to velocity as quickly as possible because the structures are different. The information processing is different. And if you just delay practicing that, you're just not developing it.
Wow, that's interesting. There.
So I find a lot of guitar players, because I can play pretty quick on guitar. People see my stuff and a lot of people say, why can't I play quick like you? I've been practicing at the metronome and slowly again, I just hit a limit. I'm like, because you're going too slow. You have to really push, right? And practice faster sooner than you think that you should be practicing faster.
Right. That's interesting, because I'm wondering if people sometimes they equate velocity or going fast to being out of control.
Yeah.
Where it's like, if you're slow and you're focusing on slowness and accuracy, then you're in control, you're focusing on the movement. But if you want to learn velocity, you better probably go at a speed that you're not going to be comfortable with.
You're going to miss a lot. You shouldn't be missing them all, right? That's why you have to get some accuracy down first, right? And I think that one of the studies was done with hockey players, right? And they found that focusing on velocity actually made them not only faster, but more accurate, but they were still focusing on where it needed to go. So over time, the brain just built the structures at that high speed that was necessary to make them more accurate at a high speed, even though they were missing a lot of initial shots, right? It's just adaptation to imposed demands.
Yeah. And well, the muscle memory probably comes into play too there. I mean, we think of that in strength training all the time as absolute strength, like, oh, like your muscles say like, oh, this is really heavy. I don't want this to be heavy anymore. So it builds up stronger and you build up more adaptation to it. It's really the same thing with speed training. Like if you're going for speed, it's like, oh, like you're going to go this fast. All right, I better adapt my body to know that I'm going to be in control if this happens again.
Yeah. So I often talk about, I think it's a good idea to kind of live on the extremes and practicing on the extremes. So when I'm practicing music or anything else, I think even with exercise, this kind of makes sense, is like, I'm often going very, very slow. Metronome is very slow. I'm focusing on as much nuances as I can. And then I'm totally other end of the spectrum, right? Think about exercise, right? A lot of heavy lifting, a lot of really intense stuff, a lot of brisk walking. I don't do a whole lot in the middle of like long, extended, moderate cardio efforts. I do some, it's important. I do some. And same thing with music, right? Sometimes it's just 120 BPM. That's what the song is. I have to practice in that range sometimes, right? But for the skills I want to really, I think, make myself the best, most capable musician, I spend a lot of time on the extremes. The really slow and the really fast, right? And then for exercise, the really heavy and the nice walk with my wife, right?
There you go. Right. Exactly. What's your training like right now? I know you got so much going on. Like, what do you do as far as your routine?
Yeah. 3 days a week right now in the gym with the heavy efforts, pressing, dumbbell bench press. So I've got military press. I like the incline dumbbell bench press right now. That's always felt good on my shoulders.
Oh, okay.
Rows, pull-ups, rack pulls instead of deadlifts, front squats with a barbell, and leg raises. Those are my primary exercises. 3 days a week, one heavier low rep day, one kind of moderate rep, and like 12 to 15-ish reps, relatively heavy weight. And then one day much lighter, but more speed. And then lots of walking, a little bit of running, and that's it.
What's the running for? Do you just enjoy the running?
So I do running as part of my warm up. So I always like to do just like a quick mile. I think everybody should just be able to do like a quick, easy mile. Yeah. Right. Like that should be a warm up for people. So I always just hit a quick, easy mile. And when, at least in Wisconsin, when it's nice out, it's really nice out. We have beautiful summers. We pay for it in the winter, but we have beautiful summers. So I just like being outside, just running, it just feels good. Puts me in a good mood. It's sort of, it's easy enough that I don't feel drained by it. I actually feel pretty restored by it. So it's just an enjoyable thing for me.
It's so funny. I'm so similar in the summertime, because I just love getting outside and being in the sun, just going for a nice run. Like you just get that sweat going, you get that heart rate up a little bit. The runner's high is a real thing too, just getting in there. Like it is a really enjoyable, thing to do. I was just breaking down an article I'm doing about the best exercise, of being like, is there a best exercise? It's like, I'm sure I'm going to be very polarizing for this, but I was like, well, there's definitely some certain criterias for it. And it's like, well, one, if you enjoy it, it's like, that's the one thing is I've had people, oh, is running good or bad? It's like, well, do you enjoy it?
Right.
It's like, we all should run, I think, in some capacity, like being able to sprint or being able to run. I think that's just a normal human function. As you said, like going out for a mile, I think that's probably a good standard that you should stay with at some point. It's like, and strength is great. I absolutely love strength. It's like going for walks too, but yeah, still have a little bit somewhere in the middle there. I think.
Yeah, I mean, a good mile like shows that like you're not a complete mess, right? Like you can't be super fat. Your joints are probably working decently. You know, your heart's got to be okay, right? It's a good like again, like if you can hit a quick mile without like feeling absolutely obliterated, you probably got a number of things going for you, right?
Yeah. Do the days when you train, is there a difference? Do you feel at all in your clarity of getting into the other work that you're doing with writing or, you know, any of the podcast work and stuff like that you do, or is there really not much of a difference?
Yeah. So like I say, most of my demanding mental work happens before my workout.
Okay.
Now, oftentimes I'll get out and have like a quick walk in the morning or a quick jog in the morning. And that can help a little bit. It doesn't always help. I gotta be honest. Like sometimes it makes no difference at all. The next day, however, I do notice, I mean, exercise takes its toll on the really heavy strength training days, which for me are about 1 day a week now, the really intense ones. The next day can be a bit foggier.
Yeah.
Honestly. Yeah. It can be a bit foggier. And I think it's just because there's just much overall fatigue. I mean, I'm not an old guy yet, but I'll tell you, it does feel different in your 30s than it does in your 20s for sure already.
It does.
So as much as I recommend and tell people to exercise for productivity, the day after a really heavy strength training session, not always, but sometimes is actually a bit of a laggy day for me. But hey, that's just the way it goes.
It's funny. It's I'm in my late 30s now, and it is a difference of just recovery and quickness of warm up where I changed my time. I used to do early morning workouts and I love doing that. Now it's like the afternoon time after getting some creative stuff done just does feel better from there. You know, I think that's an important point of routine.
That's always been the case for me. I've always done my harder mental work before the harder physical work.
Really?
Some people are different, but I found that if I do the really harder physical work first, it actually takes a little bit too much away from me. I like to do the harder mental work first.
That was a tough thing for me to change, to be honest. Cause like, that's like, I just like, oh, I'm really energized right now in the morning time. That's like, oh yeah, I'll go crush it out in the gym and really get my, training going. But I found that at 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock or so, those were some foggy times that were going on. And that's when a lot of times I'm, connecting on the podcast, or I'm doing some other writing, or I'm doing some sort of work that takes some creativity and some mind work. I'm like, shit, like I can't be foggy anymore with this, it's like, so having that discipline sometimes to change the routine when you need to adjust. I think that's an important part about routine as well, as like, it's not a prison that you have to live by, it's like changing and adjusting it. And, sometimes that can change over time. It can change with age and different things as well. It's like, I think that's part of being flexible and being intuitive is changing the routine around. And
also understanding your own sort of natural rhythms, I suppose. I mean, my wife's very different than me, but for me, like, I'll tell you, like, as I've said already, like, I know the time of day when I feel most creative and like mentally with it, which is the morning. I mean, come like 3 or 4 o'clock, man, I'm as smart as a baboon. I'm worthless. Right. That's when I play Mario Kart with the kids. Right. I still got enough to whoop up on them on the cart. Don't get me wrong. Right.
And 64.
Switch right now, but we still have the old N64. Yeah. So love Mario Kart. Right. But like, I get that. Right. Like, I'm just not certain times of the day, especially after certain efforts. It's really kind of futile to keep pushing it at a certain point. So do something else. Yeah.
Totally get it. So you got 2 books that are going out right now. And these are both philosophy books that you're writing?
Yeah. Right. So one of them is, the manuscript is already in. It's called Aquinas' Little Known Way to God. So the branch of philosophy I've always focused on is metaphysics and philosophy of religion. Those have always been the most interesting to me because they kind of get to what's most fundamental in terms of questions you can ask about reality. So the first book is focusing on the philosophy of Thomas Aquinas, great medieval philosopher. And I think he's brilliant. I think he's got essentially reality kind of figured out. So a lot of that book is exploring how Thomas saw the world, how he saw the structure of being, and how he thought that you could use reason to get from experiences that are exceedingly common to the transcendent. So that's what that book is about. And then the second one is in a similar vein, also in philosophy of religion, but it's taking a a little bit different approach. Rather than focusing on just one philosopher, it's focusing on different philosophical paradigms, or just like big pictures of reality that philosophers like to come up with. So you've got, for example, naturalism. Naturalism is a theory that nature is self-sufficient. It can explain everything. Then you've got like classical theism and neoclassical theism. Those would be more of the supernatural paradigms. And it's looking at these paradigms and saying these paradigms are essentially worldview hypotheses. They're used to try and explain the vast range of experience, not just scientific experience, but often phenomenological and personal and moral experience. And it compares these paradigms, and it tries to evaluate these paradigms in terms of their explanatory comprehensiveness, which one actually is the most, explanatorily comprehensive, what explains the most, but also in terms of theoretical virtues, which one can explain the most with the least commitments, Occam's razor type of thing.
Right.
And I'm making the case that classical theism is the best paradigm there. So similar books, but two different projects, to be sure.
Yeah. Seems like it's probably a lot of research that you've had to do for these books. That's probably taken up quite
15 plus years of all that. I've been at this for a while. Yeah. These books have been cooking up for a long time.
I was going to say, is this something that you've been trying to aspire to write and kind of get down on paper for a bit?
And like with a lot of projects, a lot of books, a lot of stuff in the books is pulling from material I've already published elsewhere, not verbatim, of course, but stuff I've written over the years and trying to pull it together and synthesize it and add to it and respond to areas where they've been criticized, or areas that I thought I didn't think out as well previously. So there's sort of a culmination of previous works in certain respects too.
Do you have dates you're looking to get the releases out on?
So the first book is in with the publisher, and it's balls in their court right now. I'm just waiting for the edits. I was hoping end of this year for that first book, and we're looking at spring of next year for the other one. I have to get that manuscript in by October. Gonna be tight, but we'll see.
Nice. Okay. So I'm sure you probably have some other plans. Probably going to write some more afterwards. You have some other books that you probably.
Whenever I'm writing a book, I always say this is going to be the last one, because books kill you. Books kill you. Every book has killed me. And that's just the nature of taking on a project like that. So my first book, all the way back with Wiley and the For Dummies, that killed me. I said I'd never write a book again. I wrote another one the next year, and another one the year after that, and so on and so forth.
It's like tattoos.
Yeah. So I'll tell you, I'm done after this, but I'm sure you talk to me in a year, I'll be on another one. Nothing immediately planned.
Oh, right.
I would like to focus on some other, projects for the next year or two, aside from taking on another book, but knowing myself, I'm sure I'll find something. Yeah. But nothing I've thought of yet. Yeah.
Well, I hope you will, selfishly, just because I enjoy your writing, and I think it's always a blast when I hear that you've got new stuff coming out. So I think that's awesome.
Well, thank you. Yeah, and it's all over the place in terms of topics and stuff too. If people like what we've been talking a lot about here with generalism skill building, then this obnoxiously framed book of mine right there, the green one, How to Be Better at Almost Everything, talks about that.
Yeah, and if listeners go back to, I think, the Breakthrough Secrets podcast, when you were on there, I think we talked a lot about that book, which was a blast.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So, Pat, dude, I think another successful one here with you. So I always learn so much of just connecting with you, and it's always great to jam. So I really appreciate you taking the time.
Likewise, Mike. Thank you so much. And let's do it again soon.
Absolutely. People want to find more of your stuff, get on your, mailers, everything like that. What's the best place that we can send them?
Yeah. So it depends what you're into. If you like the fitness and kettlebell stuff, the website 101kettlebellworkouts.com will put you on my email list. And I'm an email guy, so I send lots of content through email. That's the best place to get that. I've got YouTube and podcasts, the Pat Flynn Show podcast. Yep. And then I do a philosophy podcast with my buddy, Jim Madden, who's been on your show, right, Mike?
Yes.
Hasn't Jim been on?
I love Jim. I got to connect with Jim again. We've had so much fun talking.
So we run the channel Philosophy for the People, which is on YouTube and iTunes as well. So if people want more of that, you can check that out.
Awesome. Pat, thank you so much. Till next time, brother.
Thank you, Mike.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. Talk to you soon. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you found some great value here. And if you like this episode, please drop a comment and leave us a 5-star rating and review. It does more to build the show than you can imagine. And do not forget to check out and join the Strength Connection Facebook group. In this group, I share the biggest takeaways and lessons from these amazing conversations, as well as training and strength tips for pursuing mastery and fulfillment in life. This group is filled with individuals looking to take full control over their strength, and it's the perfect space to explore new ideas and to share your journey. And you'll also get exclusive access to these Strength Connection Mastery Seminars. It's a deep dive into the physical, mental, and spiritual training that you can begin using immediately. So do not wait, go now. Seriously, go. All right, much love to you. Thank you so much, and I'll catch you on the next one.